How's everyone doing? Good. Welcome to the Institute of Design. My name is Ivo Matthew, and I'm the Dean of the Institute of Design. I see a lot of familiar faces, and I see a lot of new people, so I'm just going to give you a little introduction to the Institute of Design. Thanks, before we get started, thanks to everybody who is here in person, but also thanks to everybody who is joining online. We are streaming this event virtually, so I'm sure there's a lot of people watching online. I want to take a few minutes to introduce the Institute of Design for those of you who don't know who we are. We were founded in 1937, 87 years ago, as a new Bauhaus. And the Bauhaus is one of the most influential schools of design in the world. Since our founding, we believe that we can create the world we want to see. And we do that using design. And we do that by transforming the systems that make our world. Cities, education, finance, food, healthcare. Those are the kind of things that we are interested in changing. Today, we are the only design school in the US that's dedicated to graduate education. And we are the first in the country, we were the first in the country to offer a PhD. And we were the first in the country to offer an MDes MBA dual degree. And a few years ago, we were the first in the country to offer an MDes MPA public administration dual degree. Now on to today's event. We have Evan Chan, who is an ID alum here, who's going to moderate a discussion between two global leaders. And the purpose of this event is twofold. One, it is to celebrate Sam Pitroda's new book, The Idea of Democracy. And the second is to talk about democracy and the future of democracy. As you can imagine, this is a timely moment to do that. Sam Pitroda is a former advisor to the Prime Minister of India and an ID board member. Joining him and Evan in conversation is Ivo Daalder, who is a former ambassador to NATO and is the president of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. With 60 plus countries going to election this year, and everything happening all around us, you'll agree that this is a timely conversation to have. We also timed the event to get as close to July 4th as possible, because that is the time when we will celebrate independence of this great nation. Why do an event on democracy here at a design school? I'm going to call on, for those of you who remember or have read Sam's book, the last chapter in his book is called Redesigning Democracy. He's an engineer by training. He could have said re-engineering democracy. He is a politician by profession. He could have said rethinking democracy. But he chose to use the word design. Why is that? Design as a word and as a concept and as a profession is compelling and powerful because it does three things. One, it is future focused. We believe that we can design the things that don't exist today and can exist in the future. Two, it's action oriented, which means that even though we may not have all the data and the information we need to do things, we can prototype things. We can act on things. And three, it is quintessentially optimistic. We are quintessentially optimistic. Irrespective of what we think about the things that are happening around us, we believe that we can make a better world through design. And this is why I think it's important to have this conversation here at IT. And it is also relevant and critical to have this conversation here at IT. The world needs a new type of leadership. And this leadership is not going to come out of traditional schools of thinking. It's going to come out of schools like the Institute of Design. And so with that, I'm going to pass it on to Evan Chan to introduce our esteemed guests and have a conversation on this idea of democracy. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Ivo. Can you hear me? Okay, great, thank you. It's wonderful to be here with you all. As Ivo said, my name is Evan Chan. I graduated from the Institute of Design here with a master's in design as well as a certificate in public administration 5 years ago in this very building in 2019. Since then, I've worked with the federal government, with state governments, and with local governments, both from outside as a consultant as well as within as a civil servant. And now I am working as a consultant adjacent to government, supporting a school district, supporting a public transit authority, and as well as building a community of professional designers in the Boston area. But you didn't come here to hear about me. Our first speaker is Ivo Daalder, who in the past was on the U.S. National Security Council under President Clinton. He was the U.S. ambassador to NATO under President Obama, and now is the CEO of the Chicago Council of Global Affairs, which is dedicated to increasing knowledge and engagement in global affairs. He also is host of the World Review with Ivo Daalder, where a weekly segment which provides diverse perspectives on emerging global stories. Ivo, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Our second speaker this evening is Sam Pitroda, who is an internationally respected development thinker, a policymaker, inventor, and entrepreneur, and who is credited with laying the foundation of India's technology and telecom revolution in the 80s. In the 90s, he founded WorldTel to help mobilize the development of telecom in developing countries. He, back in India, has been the chairman of the National Knowledge Commission, the chairman of the National Innovation Council, as well as a top advisor to the Indian Prime Minister. He is also a graduate of IIT with a master's degree in electrical and electronics engineering. And most salient to our conversation tonight, he is also the author of a number of books, one of which is The Idea of Democracy, and is the impetus for our conversation tonight. Sam, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So I'll direct the first question for you, Sam. In your book, you talked about the way that democracy works, the value of democracy, the importance of leadership, technology, and democracy, even redesigning democracy, as we heard. Why did you feel that this was the moment to publish this book?
First of all, I want to really thank ID for hosting this. Thank Dean and all of you for your presence. As you told me earlier, or told us, that I went to school here 60 years ago. Though I'm an engineer, I know how I have benefited from democracy. Democracy in India and democracy here. Freedom of movement, freedom of thought, liberty, diversity, all of these things became very important part of my life. And my journey is essentially a journey of democracy. My father had 4th grade education. We lived in a small little village. And I feel democracy has shaped me and my family. In 2024, there are elections in 60 different countries. And I find that democracy is at crossroads in many parts of the world. In India, we had a major challenge because we have a group headed by Prime Minister Modi that believed in a country which would be dominated by one group of people, Hindu religion. While India is a country of 1.5 billion people, where Hindus and Muslims and Christians and Jews and Buddhists all live in harmony. And that has been the beauty of India. And I got very concerned that democracy is at crossroads in India. And to some extent, we had same problem here in the last election. In India, during this election, 900 million people voted. That's a big number. Large number were young people. And I realized that a lot of these young people really don't quite understand the real aspect of democracy. We all take it for granted. So I thought it's a good idea to write a book mainly for young, which outlines the basic idea of what is democracy, history of democracy, how does it work, what is the role of institutions, how can you hijack democracy. So all of these issues are very important to me. And I can tell you, after this book was written, a lot of people in India started talking a different language. People realized that this election is all about democracy. And the party that was hoping to get 400 seats out of 543 got only 240. Did not even get a majority. Because people realize that democracy is an important part of future. So India was at crossroads. This way you go, you will select Hindu Rashtra, authoritarian regime, misinformation, or you take this road, which is more geared towards diversity, inclusion. Because I believe democracy is equally important for development. It basically empowers everybody. I feel empowered. And I've been to China, I've been to Russia, I've traveled a great deal. And you find that the quality of empowerment, especially in the US, is very different. We are a unique country in the US in terms of understanding the fabric of democracy. Our institutions are very robust, independent, autonomous. People speak up. We can agree to disagree. And I wrote the book mainly because there are elections in 60 countries. You know, I have friends in South Africa, I have friends in Turkey, I have friends all over. You know, for the Congress party, I run Indian Overseas Congress, where we are in 32 countries, and large number of Indians participate in promoting the idea of democracy, the idea of India, rooted in these fundamental values. You know, you have large diaspora in US, almost 5 million people of Indian origin. In Middle East, tens of millions. In Europe, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Australia. So all of these people, I believe, also have a role to play in promoting democracy. It's a long answer to a short question.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I'd like to turn the attention to Ivo. You also, from a previous conversation, I know have a very personal connection to the importance of democracy. Would you mind sharing a bit of why democracy is so important to you, and give us an overview of your perspective on the state of democracy today?
And all in 2 minutes, right? So first of all, I want to thank Sam and congratulate him, not on your book, on the Indians winning the Cricket World Cup.
World Cup? I thought you were talking about democracy.
No, the Cricket World Cup. This is the important thing.
Well, we are
which 1.5 billion people were about 2 or 3 billion people were watching.
Yes.
And we think that the World Series or the Super Bowl is something big idea. Anyway, but congratulations on the book, and thanks. And I love the idea of design and democracy getting here, because in some ways I have a very similar, even though very different story than Sam. Sam and I are similar, and we're both immigrants. I was born and raised in the Netherlands, but unlike India, democracy in the Netherlands was saved by the United States in a very direct way. My parents grew up in the pre-war and then during World War II, period. My father spent 5 years in northern Holland, including the hunger winter of 44-45, when more people died in the Netherlands than during the entire war combined, including the 98% of the Jews who perished in the camps in that winter. My mother is a survivor of the Holocaust herself. She escaped to Switzerland in late 1942. And the darkness of the forces of anti-democracy, of fascism, of Nazism, of totalitarianism in one form or another, were part of my parents' generation and their lives. But we were saved by the United States. We just celebrated a few weeks ago the 80th anniversary of D-Day, a remarkable feat of heroism by Americans and Canadians and Brits and men, mostly men of many other other countries, who came to liberate Europe from the forces of despair. And I grew up at a time where democracy was a given. That's how that's just was part of it. But at the dinner table, my dinner table, democracy was a gift. And it was perilous and difficult to make sure that you kept it, that it could go away in an instant. My father was a political scientist who spent his entire professional career figuring out how do you make sure that democracy does not fail again. And that was a question that nobody was asking. And now we're all asking it in one form or another. And Sam asked it with regard to the emergence of Hindu nationalism. There are people in France today who are asking the question with regard to a far-right party that now has over a third of the vote in the last election and may become a majority. And where is it going to go? In my own country, in the Netherlands, the largest party is an anti-democratic far-right party, which is now leading in the government. And of course, we have an election here that has, as one of its candidates, a man who does not accept democracy, does not accept the fundamental core of democracy, which is that the people get to decide who governs. No, he says, I get to decide who governs. I mean, I have a Supreme Court who actually agrees with that in one form or another, who has decided that as a president you can do whatever you want as long as you say it's an official act. As Justice Sotomayor said in her dissent to the immunity case yesterday, we have put a king above the law. I don't know if you've seen Hamilton, but I don't think that's what this was about in 1776. I thought we were trying to get rid of the king. At least that's what George III, who was a marvelous character in Hamilton, sang about. And now we get the king back. So I worry deeply about democracy in a way that my parents' generation did, and my generation, I'm 64 years old, never did. And most of you in this room never worried about democracy, and now we all do. And I think that's why this is an important conversation.
Thank you. Both of you are very involved in the education, in spreading a broader education and understanding of what democracy is, the situation in the world today, and its importance. Especially, Sam, you mentioned that when you were thinking, what you had in mind as you wrote this book was the younger generation and their understanding and appreciation and valuation of democracy. I'm curious if this is really for the both of you, what are some of the most commonly misunderstood things about democracy by this younger generation?
Younger generation gets their information today mainly from social media. They like bites, sound bites. while democracy requires you to have deep understanding of interworking of various elements in democracy. You have legislation, that branch, your executive branch, judiciary, and all kinds of institutions, hundreds and hundreds of institutions. How do all of these work together to really make sure that we have food on table? We have job, we have bank account. We take all of these things for granted. To understand every bit of it, you really require in-depth knowledge. And I find that very few young people really take time to read things the way my generation read, perhaps. Unless you are a great student, it's a different story. You know, they do all the right things. But an average student wants to get information on this. So I think for younger people, it is important to understand that democracy is something you have to work at. It is always work in process. It's never done. It takes different shape, and you got to really work on it. And everyone has a role to play. You have a role to play at your local government level, you have a role to play in your institutions, and you have to speak up. And sometimes when you speak up, you get beaten up too. And you got to be able to stand that and stand for the right things. That's why I think it is important for young people to really take much more active role in understanding democracy, in participating in democracy, because it's their future. I'm 82. What can I do? Not much. You know, but I want my children and my grandchildren to have freedom, liberty. I want them to live in an inclusive world where everybody is treated with respect, dignity. Nobody is going to ask you what is your religion, what is your race, what is your color, what language you speak. Because at the end of the day, and Corona told us, showed us, that we are all interconnected, interwoven, interdependent, interrelated. It's very difficult to draw boundaries around us. You know, we look different, we speak differently, you know, we eat different food, but that's the beauty of this world. Diversity is something we need to celebrate. When I go to China, I love Chinese food. When I go to Japan, I love Japanese food, you know, and I am at home everywhere because I just feel it's my home. I don't feel that I'm in a foreign country. You know, I remember once going to China, one of the mayors of the city that I was visiting had a special dinner for me. And I had a Canadian friend with me, and there were 12 of us on the table. While we're eating, some young girl comes in and puts a little bowl, and out comes black scorpions. And all Chinese get up, take their stick, and start eating. And I just backed off from my chair, you know, because this is live, scorpions. So Jack almost screamed. And I said to Jack, Jack, these guys are eating. Nothing is happening to them. They are enjoying. There must be something right here. Okay? I said, let's try. I ate too. It was okay. The point is the joy of experiencing different things. Now one could say, oh, that's a bad thing, you shouldn't do it. It's okay. But I believe in that diversity. And they felt really great that I also ate their scorpion. And that's the beauty of the world we live in.
Ivo, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. If
I have a slightly different lesson than eating scorpions. I mean, two points. One that I want to highlight and to emphasize Sam's message to the younger generation. You can't complain about what's happening in your country if you don't participate in the process. And when 75% of people in the age of 18 to 29 don't vote, don't be surprised that things go wrong.
Yep.
And in this election, by the way, it's more important than any election because we have a real choice. Not between Biden and Trump, between democracy and not having it anymore, between 250 years of an experiment to try to create an ever better union, an ever more perfect union, and the possibility that we are going to take that union apart. You haven't been here since 1860 and possibly not since 1776. So that's one piece. But the other lesson that I think, which is not just for young people, it's for everyone. We are learning that democracy is based on norms, and more importantly, on the acceptance of norms. And if you are willing to defy them, you can get a long, long way to take democracy down. And the Supreme Court says X. It's only if we accept X as the norm, the rule to be accepted, that it works. But what if we don't? What if the Supreme Court starts to say that X, in fact, is Y? How does that work? We have a system built around the rule of law, but the rule of law only works if you accept the rule of law. If that's not something that is enforced, it's accepted. And if you don't accept it, the system falls apart. The only way it can then work is through the use of force, to force people to abide by the law. Not just through police or armies, but in the whole wider political context. There is a norm that says when you lose an election, you leave office. But if you say, I don't want to leave office, what are you going to do about it? How does it work? We haven't had to confront that. And by the way, one of the things that is most remarkable, and maybe we'll talk about it a little later, we've had about 2 billion people who've now gone to the polls in India, in South Africa, all the countries that Sam mentioned, Mexico, yeah. European Union, France, everywhere. The UK starts on Independence Day, of all places, and all dates, will go to the polls. And what's the most remarkable thing about these elections? No one has said that the outcome was rigged. Everyone, losers in particular, whether Mr. Modi or the ANC in South Africa or President Macron in France, no one has said that the election was rigged. That's the marvel of elections. But that's a norm. No reason why you should necessarily accept that this norm is the way. That's how fragile the system is. But it's also how important it is that we keep it and that we as a community participate in it and make sure that the norm is abided by through our participation, through making sure that this is part of who we are, and to make clear that if the norm is broken, that is unacceptable. And we can actually do this in this country on November 5th. We believe in norms, we vote, and we win the election. Whoever we is, collectively. That's how we can make sure norms work.
Our democracy truly is fragile, and that really comes through in what you've shared. Thank you. And on that point, I'd like to turn the conversation to another topic that was covered in the book, which was around technology and democracy and the role that technology can play to advance democracy in the world today. One thing I'd like to ask, maybe I'll start with you, Sam. How can we ensure that people are kept at the center? Technology is advancing at a breakneck pace. in all facets of our life, democracy included, politics included, civil activity included. How can we keep people at the center?
It's a pretty complex issue, partly because all businesses predominantly focus on profit. They talk a big game, but at the end of the day, it's all about bottom line. And that's also with a focus on shareholder value and not value for the community, value for the stakeholder. In that kind of an environment, the larger issue which relates to well-being of the people is always under the rug, unfortunately. Okay. How do you change that? I mean, when I look at the world today, I think in the last 20, 30 years, we have gotten to a point everybody is focused on only power and profit, as opposed to focusing on planet and people. If we make that shift, the world would be much better. But we don't worry about planet, so we have global warming. We don't worry about people, so there is hunger. We spend $2 trillion on defense. We know we can reduce hunger by spending $200 billion a year, eliminate completely. We won't do it. Okay. So I think we know the answers, but the vested interests are so very large. And if you talk against these vested interests, you get penalized. You get punished, directly or indirectly. Okay? And I know it well, because I've done it in the past. Unless and until young people begin to create a movement to pay attention to planet and people, the focus on profit and power will drive us crazy. I am very worried. We have huge income inequality all over the world. In India, we celebrate new billionaires. So we have created many billionaires saying unicorn company. But in the process, we have created poverty for a large number of people. So you have a handful of people who have lots of wealth, and you have lots of people who have nothing. That cannot go on for too long. So we need not just top-down approach, we need bottom-up approach. We need more localization, we need to create local jobs. And I am sort of more of a Gandhian. You know, I was born in 1942 in British Raj. And when I was growing up as a child, Gandhi was the message in India, which was very different from East India Company message or British Raj message. Okay. Unfortunately, world didn't pay too much attention to Gandhian way of doing things. And we created this monster called multinationals everywhere. I can give you many examples. You know, all of the social media companies block us. Okay. My Twitter account hasn't changed from 365,000. That's it, for 7 years. I know it is blocked. Rahul Gandhi's account at YouTube used to get 30,000 more people every day, and all of a sudden, leveled off. So we wrote to YouTube. I wrote to them. And the answer was, oh, don't worry, this is the way it is. Nobody paid attention. Finally, somebody in Wall Street Journal wrote a front page story. Next day, everything changed. So these large companies also pay attention to their profit. I'm not giving them ad. Why should they favor me? If you are giving them ad, you will have the luxury. So I think there are lots of issues in technology where technology leaders are creating opinion, driving messages, spreading lies if necessary, spreading hate. Okay? And all of these are very real issues today in the world. And not enough people talk about it in open.
Thank you, Sam. Yeah, we are quickly running out of time. My goodness, it's flying by. The last topic I wanted to hear both of your thoughts on was the topic of leadership and democracy. In this world today that is ever more volatile than you could make a case ever before, a new kind of leader really is needed with different kinds of skills, different mindsets, and different perspectives. Ivo, I'd like to start with you to hear your thoughts on what kind of leader is needed in the world today.
You know, that's a really tough question because there's not just one kind of leader. There's not some person that you can put in front of the cameras and all of a sudden things will work. But the essentials of leadership is, number one, to remember that you can only lead if people follow. We always look at who's in the driver's seat and driving the car, but what's really important is how many people are in the back seat and whether they're doing it enthusiastically. So a leader has to connect with people, but connect in a way that makes the followers not just following them blindly, but full with questions and constantly probing that the leader is doing the right thing. Because the real danger is a leader who has lots of followers who don't care where the leader is taking them, but just want to be with the leader. That's called a cult. That's not a democracy. You need someone with a vision that people can buy into but can question and perfect by participating in it, by being part of that process. And that can be a whole variety of different people. It can be young, it can be old, it can be female, it can be male, as long as it's inclusive, as Sam so rightly said, and as long as it allows for the development of the project that you're doing through the participation of other people. And most importantly, a leader who can say, it's time for me to say goodbye. Another Hamiltonian phrase. Let's teach the world how to say goodbye. To say, I am not the right person at this point to be your leader. The biggest problem we have with leaders is who forget that it's not about them, but about the country or the place that they, or the company or whatever it is, the place they are leading. And that it's time to say goodbye. The hardest thing is to know when you're no longer should be the leader.
I think there is a crisis of leadership all over the world. I see it in corporate world, I see it in politics, mainly because the kind of character you need in politics, that character to some extent is missing. You have leaders like Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela. It's a different class of leaders than leaders today. You know, I see people at G8 and G7 and G20s negotiating. They're basically marketing people. They're making a deal, selling equipment, selling defense equipment. No one talks about education, health, hunger. You will hardly see a discussion because those things don't matter to them. Leader also requires understanding of complex systems. We are living in a world where complex systems drive day-to-day life. Life is not that simple. Yeah. Because of economy, because of technology, employment, terror, okay. Wars. Look at, there are 20 wars going on in the country right now. 20 in 21st century. Okay. When we talk about information culture and the power of knowledge and all that, okay, we can't seem to settle wars very quickly. So there is a crisis of leadership world over.
Before we open it up for questions, there's one phrase there are two sentences that stood out to me like a shining light from your chapter on leadership and democracy, and I just wanted to read these. And selfishly, the reason why they stood out to me was because it reminded me of design. Leadership needs to be more human, collaborative, connected with people's emotions, and humbler to be effective. In this milieu of volatility, uncertainty, and complexity, what is more important than ever for the leader to be empathetic. Effective leadership also calls for enrichment of the leader's toolbox of values, integrity, ideas, and management skills. One thing that stood out to me from this chapter was the importance for leaders to grow and to learn, right?
See, most of the leaders today focus on command and control. They want to be in control and they want to command. What you really need is someone who is more into collaboration, cooperation, co-creation, communication. And you don't find many leaders who are willing to listen well. And it's a problem. It's a very serious problem world over. Okay. Once they are in a position, they think they know it all. Okay. As opposed to saying, hey, I'm here to listen. I would listen to young people. Okay, because they see world very differently than I see. Yeah. I think that empathy is also a very important part, and humility. Very critical.
Thank you, Sam. In the remaining time, we'd love to get some questions from the audience.
Thank you for the talk, panelists. Thank you for the talk, panelists. My question is for you, Mr. Sam. Any law that is misused is subsequently revised in any democracy. So let's say, for example, in 75, when emergency was declared in India, the 42nd Amendment granted Parliament unprecedented power to do so. And the subsequent 43rd and 44th Amendments reversed it. In today's context, which is where India today is facing an authoritarian regime for the past 10 years or a decade or so, and we've seen misuse of power by the central agencies and the media not doing its job. How do you suggest then the next person who comes into power or the next government that comes in ensure that this is not repeated again by anybody who comes to power for their motive?
People have to speak up. People have to demonstrate. People have to demand. It's not going to happen overnight.
But do you think there are any laws that can be put in place? Because we saw that in the case when the emergency was declared. But what about this? How do you control this now?
Today, the way the emergency is being exercised is very different. It is being exercised by controlling institutions. Okay, there are really three major institutions in India that ought to be independent, but they take orders from the leaders. Judiciary, financial related, and security related. Financial related could be income tax, all that. And the other could be remaining security institutions. Okay. These institutions need to be fair, independent, make their own judgment, and cannot wait for the order to come from Prime Minister. I am on bail. I am on bail because I am part of the case going on in India for 11 years on a newspaper called National Herald. So I am on bail along with Sonia Gandhi, Rahul Gandhi. For 11 years, they haven't found anything. There is nothing to be found. But case continues. So they can write in the paper that you are on bail. Okay. So it's a very subtle way of exercising emergency powers. Then you have civil society. A lot of civil society people are being attacked for some income tax violation, some foreign exchange violation. You send $100 to somebody and say, this is illegal, you know. So civil society is afraid to speak up. And then comes media. If I'm running a big media empire, my advertising comes from government predominantly. And if I say something against government, they'll stop my ads. I'll be broke. So I better draw the line. And that's when people have to speak up. So it's a very serious issue. I wish there were quick answers. There are no quick solutions, you know.
Hey, thank you very much for all your wisdom. I want to take this whole leadership thing in one direction. So I teach entrepreneurship, and of course, there's always the myth of the entrepreneur. We've seen also whether it's in almost any system, there's always one person on top. So what about how might we, to use a design question, envision a world where there's shared leadership and not always just this one person that's in power? And is there a way we might think about that might solve a lot of the problems that we have?
But that's what democracy is all about.
It's
It is
not.
about
We
shared
still have
leadership.
one person, right?
Yeah, but still, you have Senate. Okay. Senate could be strong enough to say to one person, hey, this is not acceptable. True. Ultimately, there'll be one person. But that one person has to listen to all the institutions. One person is not given carte blanche to go do whatever you want to do. And like he said, when Supreme Court gives that, you're finished.
Yeah, I actually think the definition of democracy is that it is not one person.
Right. Right.
In a very fundamental way. So if you look at a parliamentary system,
Right.
and in fact, this is what's happening to Mr. Modi, and you have a majority. See what's going to happen in the UK.
Yeah.
Labour Party is likely to have a majority of 3, maybe even 350 seats.
Yeah.
Largest majority in the history of modern politics. What does that mean? Does that mean that Keir Starmer can now do whatever he wants? No.
No.
He can't. He has to make sure that that majority, or at least a part of that majority, is with him at all times. And in that sense, he's constrained. He's also constrained by the reality that he has to have another election in 5 years. And that in order to have that election, he's got to make sure that he wins that majority and not assume that it will happen, as Mr. Modi did, and look what happened to him. The president of France thought, who's a very powerful person, singular person, thought he could control the outcome of an election. As the New York Times said, Macron's is marooned, which I thought was a pretty good phrase, not a very felicitous one. He is going to be president for 3 years with very little power. Even the president of the United States, probably the most powerful political democratic leader in the world, is constrained, or at least used to be
Yeah.
before we had a Supreme Court that decided that he shouldn't be constrained, and who believed that the core, as I think it was what Robert said, the core of our system is an energetic and independent executive. Really? Why is Article 1 Congress, not the presidency?
Yeah.
I thought the whole idea was not to have an independent, energetic executive, but a constrained executive. Anyway, you see where I'm coming from. So I think a working democracy, in fact, isn't about one person. It can't work with one person. A working democracy has a free press that is able to do what the Washington Post is doing to its own publisher right now, which is to find whether the guy did stuff that was illegal. Remarkable. What other place in the world do you have a newspaper that is going after its own publisher? So that one leader, who actually isn't the one leader because Bezos owns him, but that one leader turns out is not a leader. That's what democracy is about. That's what it works. If you have a leader who's unconstrained,
I think in
they
democracy,
fail.
yeah, I think in democracy you want majority to first take care of minority.
Yes, absolutely.
In democracy, you are president of everybody or prime minister of everybody and not one party that elected you. Party elected you, that doesn't mean you have to just do what your party is expecting it. You have to do things for everybody. And that's the difference. Okay? It's not like running a business. It is my business. I can do whatever I want to do. I can fire anybody. Okay? I can promote anybody. You can't do that. Okay? And that can only come if you have some character. If you have no character, if you have no guilt feeling, if you don't care about anything except yourself, you got a wrong guy. Okay? But people of the democratic country will have to decide that. One nice thing about US which I admire, more so than anywhere else, is our institutions are very robust. Very robust. Okay? Whether you have think tanks, universities, scientific laboratories, these are all institutions in democracy. You can't ignore them. In US, you can't have a president call a head of the scientific lab and say, you do this. There'll be revolt, okay, which may not happen in many other countries. Look at what happened during this, conflict in Gaza. Students spoke all over. It happens in America. It doesn't happen. It didn't happen in India, the largest democracy. Indian students did not speak up, whatever the right or wrong. I'm not saying this is right and this is wrong. Okay? But they spoke. And that's the beauty of America. Okay? I admire our independent institutions. There is a voice, there is debate, discussion, dialogue, conflicts. We resolve conflicts and we move on.
Please.
Sam, I want to build on something you just said because I agree with you that you have majority rule of minority rights, that everybody should be respected between the governor and the governed. But we're living in the age of the authoritarians now, where we're seeing it all over the world. And it seems unstoppable in terms of a trend. And so my question to you is, the institutions that you talked about, the relationship between government and institutions and the people, is falling apart. Trust is at an all-time low. The Edelman Trust Index just came out, and they've been measuring it for like 40 years, and it's the lowest it's been in 40 years. So my question to both of you is, given that people now are feeling vulnerable and they're seeing everybody else as the other and that everybody else is getting a better deal than them and that they're the victim, how can you make a case to people around the world that going back to a social democracy, based on everything you talked about, is much better than having somebody who's an authoritarian simplify your life and essentially make all the decisions for you.
Well, I think we took democracy for granted for too long, and we are paying for it. If we had done our work in the last 10, 20 years, as technology came up, especially social media, internet, at that point in time, we didn't realize that our institutions will get affected by this. You see, information technology brings about openness, accessibility, connectivity, networking, democratization, decentralization. It is about content, it is about context, and it's about communication. It democratizes knowledge. It decentralizes decision making, and it demonetizes many things. While this was going on for 20 years, we just let it happen and didn't realize the impact of all of this on democracy. And now, all of a sudden, we are waking up saying, hey, wait a minute. Because of all this, we thought people will be empowered, but we got exactly opposite to that. Yeah. So now we are all shaken up. And we are saying, why is there a rise of dictatorial attitude, fascist? Because they are using technology to change your mind, to manipulate you, to lie, to promote hate, fear. And we have to stand up and saying, they are all my family. They are all part of me. And I got to worry about all of them. It's not about just myself. If I'm better off and my neighbor is not better off, it should bother me a little bit. Okay. But it doesn't today, because the equation is you optimize your profit at the cost of somebody else. And then you pay. You pay it differently. Yeah. I mean, look, I have lived in Chicago for 60 years. South side of Chicago hasn't changed much. Okay? You go 4 blocks south of University of Chicago, it's a different world. Why? Why is that? Why do we have largest number of people in the prison, percentage-wise? We are a rich country, highly educated. What's going on here? Our answer is build more prisons. Okay? Our answer is give police machine gun, militarize our police. Okay? I mean, in Chicago, there is no Institute of Non-Violence. There is an Institute of Studying Violence, but not of non-violence. What are we doing? When President Obama came to power, I thought there'll be some impact in Chicago. None whatsoever. Sorry for saying that. Okay. And they are all part of us. Okay. But even in a rich country like ours, we have disparities. And there is no reason for disparity, at least in this country. Okay. But when you talk like this, people think, oh, you're idealist. Okay, you're not practical. What do you mean you're idealist? This is not idealism, this is common sense. Okay. Don't get me on this, sorry.
Ivo, any closing thoughts?
Institutions have to deliver for the people. If they don't deliver, you're not going to be able to trust them or believe in them or be willing to go out and fight for them. And our institutions have not delivered for the people for too long. And deliver can mean many different things. But we haven't had government. For too long, politics has not been about winning elections in order to do what you think is good for the country. We are about elections so we can win. in order to prevent the other side from winning. We're in a win-lose, not I run for government, I run for this position so I can do this for the people who elect me. No, I'm running for government for this position so I can prevent that person from governing, from being in power. When the minority leader at the time of the Senate said of President Obama, our #1 goal is to make sure he does not get reelected in 4 years, you have to ask the question, what are you trying to do? Never mind whether you believe that Obama was right and wrong, it had nothing to do with it. But isn't your #1 goal to gain power so you can deliver for the people in the way you think is right? We have lost that. And I think that's, at its core, elections should be about different philosophies and different visions of how you deliver. And now elections are about winning so the other side loses.
And also elections have become a big business.
Well, that too.
We spend billions and billions on election. I just don't get it. In India, we must have spent probably 10 billion. Okay? In a poor country like that, for what? But we do that. We do that because television people expect ads. You have rallies, so all these fancy tents are built for 200,000 people to come to listen to some crap for 30 minutes. They have to be fed.
Or 2 hours.
Yeah, or 2 hours. And then they wait in heat and dust. They have to be fed, they have to be given water. For what? So if we decide that all elections will have certain requirements. One, no more TV ads. Whatever you want to say, you say it on your website. No more rallies of more than 50 people. Okay. You can simplify it. Automatically, costs will go down, corruption will go down. I know several friends of mine in the US government, elected people, senators, congressmen. Poor guys are spending most of their time in raising money. I mean, I feel sorry for them. Okay, they'll say, give me $5, give me $50, come to a lunch, $100 lunch, $1,000 lunch. I mean, what's going on? These are the people I respect. I want them to do good for the society. Why should they be worrying about $50 donation? But that's what we have done. Okay. And nobody is concerned about this, saying, why should my congressman be spending 70% of his or her time in raising money? We need more conversations like this. Okay, and that's why I want to thank ID for thinking about this. I think design is not about products. Design is about our society, our people, our communities, our growth, our prosperity, our safety, our security. All of these things are very important to me. I wish I knew all this when I was young. I didn't know. Okay.
I appreciate that we're ending on this note of not just the state of democracy in the world today, but coming back to the purpose of democracy, which is, and our leaders, which is to deliver for the people. Okay.
Can we give a round of applause to our panelists and our moderator?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you all for joining. We'll have a reception here so you can continue the conversation. But before we close out, I want to thank a few people. I want to thank everybody who made this happen, especially our panelists, Sam, Ivo, for taking time out. I know there's a lot going on globally that you probably need to be involved in. I want to thank Evan for flying in from Boston and away from his family to do this for us. I want to thank everybody at ID. I want to thank the video crew for helping us as always, the event services, catering people, everybody, and all of you for joining. If this is interesting to you, if you truly believe that there is a future state that we can actually design, then please do check out our programs. We have lots of programs, especially for people who are interested in this systemic change that Sam and Ivo were talking about. I urge you to check that out. For those of you who are interested in such programming, please join our mailing list and check out our social media channels. There's a lot more of these programs coming online. We are partnering with other institutions in Chicago and globally to present more events like this to you. And finally, I want to thank everybody, all of you, for coming in person here. For those of you who are here in person, we have food and drinks for you. For those of you online, thanks for joining us. Adieu. This is the end of the streaming, but I hope you will join us in the future for all other things.
Like that.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks to our panelists, and let's give a round of applause for everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.